Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation we're about to hold. I'm Grace. I am on the activism and outreach team here at WWF, and I am so excited to be introducing and moderating a conversation between Alexa White, who is the 2020 WWF Conservation Leadership Award winner, and tonight we're also going to be joined by the 2019 recipient, Maka. For those of you who don't know much about the award, the Conservation Leadership Award was established to recognize and support young leaders from the ages of 18 to 30 who are making a positive impact on the environment from within their own communities to around the world. Winners will receive access to WWF's network as well as our global experts and as well as a financial prize that they can use to further their professional and or academic goals within conservation. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce Alexa White, the 2020 winner of the award. And we're thrilled to be able to celebrate Alexa and her work here at WWF. And before I pass it on to her, I'll give you a very quick bio that she can delve into a little bit more. Alexa is a brilliant agroecologist and climate activist who is currently pursuing her PhD at the University of Michigan. Her work centers around the issues of sustainable agriculture, food sovereignty, and international environmental governance, among so many other topics. Hi, Alexa. Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations to you from all of us here at WWF. We are so excited to be able to have this conversation with you and kind of celebrate your work throughout the year. Do you want to go right ahead and just tell us more about yourself and your work?
Definitely, yeah. Thank you again, Grace. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at the University of Michigan in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. My passions lie in the importance of small-scale farmers across the globe. In connection, my scientific interests are agroecology, food sovereignty, and peasant studies. So if you were to think about those words, oftentimes not everyone knows exactly what they mean. So agroecology is just that, agriculture and ecology. So it's the study of the relationships between agriculture and the ecological systems that be in agricultural systems. Then food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is how we would describe a food system. It's a system where people control the food that's produced, how it's distributed, and how it's consumed. And then in contrast to that, we would see the rise of supermarkets, mega farms, and the excessive use of pesticides and poor land use. So this would encroach upon a natural habitats. And then peasant studies is just an area of study that's dedicated to looking at the social aspects of rural areas in the developing world. So my interest in all of this came from my relationship with my grandparents. My dissertation research expanded upon that and looks into the international food systems and how they can be better equipped to respond to issues of climate change. So specifically, I work on how climate resiliency practices can be better understood by speaking to and including small-scale farmers in these processes. So I specifically work within the realm of international policy, and my work concentrates on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll get to that later. In terms of my career goals and activism goals, beyond my PhD and throughout my career, I hope to lead major changes in environmental policymaking on either a federal or international level. And then as an activist, I hope to provide a platform for farmers and other people involved in the food system to help have a better informed environmental policy and promote food sovereignty. Using this award, I hope to help fund my research. So my latest expeditions are in Hawaii and Jamaica. So thank you again for this award.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And it's so fascinating for me to kind of hear about your work and your background. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have tonight. Next, I'm going to introduce Maka, who is the recipient of the 2019 award. And she's taken part in several of our events. So to some of you, she may be a familiar face. A quick background on Maka: she is a scholar, activist, storyteller, and ceremonial performer from Southeast Alaska. She devotes her time to environmental and social advocacy on behalf of Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth and women. Hi, Maka. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm Matish. I just want to introduce my clans. My name is Kilkleote. I am from the Rivenmorty and Glenelg clan, the Cup River clan, and it is the House of the Owl. My father is from the Six Nations Reservation in Canada, and I grew up in a small village called Yakutat, which is in Southeast Alaska. And I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited for Alexa. You all are in great hands with Alexa on the way.
All right, thank you both. I'm just going to dive into our first question. So you both are here because you're exceptional young leaders in the environmental space, and your impact is far-reaching. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of recognizing and showcasing and supporting young leaders in the conservation space? Alexa, if you want to start, we can start with you, and then Maka, you can follow up.
Yeah, definitely. So when we think of youth, oftentimes we think of them as being an influential group in the population. I would say that they're the most influential group in the population when we think of age distribution. So if we're looking to the youth, we're looking to the future. The majority of the world's youth, so that's about 26% of the world, is consisted of people that are under the age of 15. So if we were to just think about the amount of people that are involved in most activism and most environmental grassroots organizations, they consist of youth. Second, the youth are necessary for systemic changes. So the vast majority of older, more seasoned individuals, we could say they might be a little bit more biased or have more experiences that might taint their views of how we think about the environment. And so change comes easier to youth with those fresh ideas and understanding how the system can change and the possibility for that to happen. And then they're also the group that's most forgotten. When we think about organizations, usually they're led by adults, and the youth are a significant part of how we get work done on the ground. So the protests, the things that we do in offices, a lot of that is led by the youth. And so all three of those things are significant reasons why youth are really important to the environmental efforts of today.
Thank you for sharing that. I think those are incredible points. And to add on to that perspective, at least here from Alaska, I've often have felt that young people can better see with clear eyes or without clouds. From my experience working with youth in Alaska, especially within the realms of climate change, we really have seen how Alaskan rural communities are on the front lines, whether it's in the communities where there's accelerated erosion or permafrost melt, or the storm surges that are taking out homes, or the threats to traditional food security. And especially going on beyond that, the vast changes in land contributing to mental health disparities among youth. Younger generations must absolutely play a lead role into addressing and making decisions about these challenges. However, we're not always present in these decisions about our homes and our lives and our bodies and our grandparents' lives. And we need to be part of. The thing is, I wouldn't say we need a seat at the table. I would say they need to come to our kitchen tables and have food with us and share space and understand truly how we are inheriting the devastating impacts of decisions being made in this world. And that we will invite you to our kitchen table if you're welcome and willing to come.
Thanks both for your insight on that. As I am getting older in my career, I'm like really looking forward to the day that I can work for someone younger than me. I mean, my boss is amazing, and you both have met her, so you can contest to that. But I'm very excited to be like, yes, lead me with your bright ideas. I am an old person now. But with that, there's a lot of inspiration behind that. And so with that, what inspired or drove each of you to the areas of work that you're focusing on right now? Alexa, you kind of alluded to your relationship with your grandfather. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? And why is the work that you do so important to you personally?
Yeah, definitely. So my grandfather. So my grandfather was a sharecropper in South Carolina, and he worked the land with his family. And he had to stop going to school in order to help his family work on the farm. And so when he decided that he wanted a different life, he left the South for New Jersey, where he met my grandmother. And years later, I was born. And then from an infant through grade school, my grandfather took care of me and my sisters after school. So since then, he's exposed me to the wonders and the meanings of what it means to work the land. So we would grow figs and tomatoes and other plants in the backyard. And if we would go to the supermarket, he would explain to me the intricate details of how we were supposed to grow crops and like what techniques he used in South Carolina to get just the right yield, and then how to get the right taste. And so that was all very exciting to me. We spent a lot of time outside growing things. And so after he introduced me to agriculture and I became older, I realized that that was an oral history. And it wasn't until I kind of became savvy with the isms in society that I realized that oppressed groups normally have the most rich oral histories. And just like my grandfather, who was a sharecropper, they have an insane wealth of knowledge that is overshadowed by today's food producers. The methods that he was using were not the same as what you would see on the typical American farm. And so it wasn't until I got to grad school that I felt equipped enough to deal with those issues and to conduct the appropriate research and provide platforms for oppressed voices, such as my grandfather's. And so honestly, it was my family's oral history being ignored that's led me to be here today.
I love what you've shared, Alexa, because I can just say for me it's the same. I feel privileged to be a humble descendant of warriors. I grew up with these stories that my grandmother and my mother would talk about these stories at the kitchen table, and it would be late at night, and I was supposed to have been in bed, but I would crawl on my belly and I would scoot towards the door and I'd push my ear against the crack where I could see the light coming in to listen to them and listen to some of the really incredible battles that my warrior ancestors did in order for us to survive. And that oral history, that belief that these were people that dreamed of being a extension of the land or an element of the sun. And I find myself dreaming to be as brave and as true for them, and to be a warrior in the modern sense of ensuring that there could be progress for our descendants for the next 10,000 years. That descendants of my family, which through my line now will now be Tlingit, Filipino, Mohawk, and Maori, that they will know that is the resilience that runs through their DNA. And so I find myself privileged to be alive because their sacrifices made our genealogy possible, and that will be the goal. And maybe I'll achieve it when I'm 100. We can live stream then, and we'll see how I'm doing.
We can get someone who's younger, than 100 to moderate this panel, and we can hopefully learn from them and pass on some oral history of our own. I think that's really great. I definitely hear you both on kind of like the ties to, I was raised also by my grandmother primarily, with my parents working, and a lot of my early childhood memories is around food. And in Korea, it's like you think about the land, how it affects the growth, but also how it affects the clay pot that you're making out of mud to store your food. And so I think that kind of relationship is something that, isn't written in textbooks, but it is something that we share more so through our experiences. So the next question I have, I think I'm going to start with Maka, and then Alexa, I'll gear the question towards you. So speaking about identities and background, it seems like for all three of us, you two especially, there's so much of an influence from your families and kind of history. So so much of your activism and environmental work comes from those sources. And Maka, in every conversation we've had, whether it be one-on-one or it be an interview or on an Instagram live or a live stream, you have talked extensively about being an Indigenous woman and activist. Can you speak to how those parts of your identity kind of inform the way you view your activism and work?
Yeah, absolutely. As a relatively young person, I've often thought in the past couple of years about the parallels of being a survivalist for my people, or an activist by modern terms. You know, the definition of activism, and I just looked this up right before this call, is of the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. And I think maybe from my perspective, the only word I would switch in there would be defending instead of campaigning. Because I find that there is a beauty when the labor that we do, the calluses you get on your hands, is based in love, based in a love for your people, and based in the thought that you are an extension of an entire community, that you are but one branch of this tree that is twisted and part of the biosystem. And so through that work I do, I think that's kind of what informs me, what roots me and grounds me to ensure that when the winds blow, I'm not going to snap and fall over.
I can completely agree, Maka. I can definitely align with the need to feel like you're an extension of the community, and that the sense of unity is really important for coming from you and I's background, but also just that it should be exemplified throughout the fields that we're in. So, as an African American woman, the majority of my ancestry is muddled by chattel slavery. Hundreds of years of knowledge have been lost in many areas, including agriculture, as a result of this. And what is left of our oral history is what should be represented in agroecology and the climate spaces. I find that besides being one of very few African American women in agroecology, I feel obligated to be a platform for many silenced voices. To be able to bring my community and bring that sense of unity into these activism spaces. And so bringing it back to the work that I do in the field, I meet so many farmers, and their lives are influenced by these effects of climate change and the effects of the environment. And so oftentimes they don't know of a way to stop it. They don't know of a way to communicate to higher leaders. And those are the people that need to hear it most. They will be the ones that will be affected by all of these things first. And so in connection, the techniques of Indigenous and Black people within the United States and abroad are typically the ones that are best equipped to combat climate change and change how we view conservation. And so those techniques and those things are really valuable, and we must listen and adopt those practices. And the way to do that is to bring in this sense of unity and diversity, and accepting that if we do not, all of those ideas and wealth of knowledge will be lost, and the people who need it the most will not receive it in time.
Thank you both for that insight. I think I'm going to pause really quick and take a question from the audience. This one comes from Ecuador. How can the youth help deal with governmental corruption, such as corrupt mining concessions, especially when at times it seems helpless? I'll let Either one of you jump in first.
I think that governmental corruption is definitely something that every country faces throughout its history, and every country faces in different ways. In terms of youth and the power that they wield, I think that if we also look through history, a lot of the activism and even just bringing light to the fact that the corruption exists is done by youth-led organizations or youth-led groups. So to directly deal with the question, I think that um, believing in youth and organizing by youth is what is most important when it comes to government corruption. Infiltrating those kinds of systemic issues is difficult, but I think that youth have done that throughout history and have done a phenomenal job. And typically, they're the ones that we look to be the canary in the mine.
Thank you for that, Alexa. I processed a couple different thoughts. One was, I wish it was back in the day before colonization and we could call another person into a single hand-to-hand combat battle and take their position. Well, we can't do that now. Youth, if we work hard enough, youth can become these people in power. We can work with, as Alexa was saying, with organizing to dismantle the water that feeds corruption. We can unroot where the corruption truly lies, and we can educate. Social media is an incredibly powerful platform. It is used for bad as much as it is used for good. However, media, I think, is a really important part to reaching the large population, as Alexa was speaking to earlier in this conversation, so that people can become informed and educated and can take action and responsibility as thus.
I'd just like to add that I agree totally. I didn't even think about the technological expanses of youth and how powerful that is. We've seen that within the United States within the past presidency term. Social media and the technological advances that we're going through are definitely within the hands of the youth. I totally agree.
So wow, we're getting a lot of really great questions from the audience. Here's one more from the US. Knowing that our planet faces these big challenges, what gives you hope?
I would say the memory of my grandparents and oral history. I think Alexa and I could both relate that our grandparents had a very strong effect in the hope they instilled within us. But I also think of my nephews and my nieces. The way that they sing and work with the land is absolutely the most precious thing that is worth fighting for, and our collective responsibility to protect and defend and bring ourselves back to the core relationship with the land.
I definitely agree. My family constantly reminds me of how the work that I do and others like me is necessary. And just being able to be in forums like this, and the fact that awards like this exist and different kinds of groups that I've met throughout my life, it's amazing that everyone remains determined. Every person that I've met within each of the groups that I've led or been a part of has been very gung-ho about facing the odds and making a change regardless of what might be thrown at us. Honestly, I'm thinking back to when I was an undergrad at Howard University. I was a part of an organization called the HBCU Climate Change Consortium. And I used to understand climate change, and I used to understand the effects of environmentalism on the environment that were happening that day at that time. But it wasn't until then that I realized that there were people that were standing with me. It wasn't an individual fight. It was something that was being fought by us all.
I think we have a question from the audience that is really relevant to both of your points, and I'm going to ask it, but also turn one of the questions into like a preview of what I'm going to ask you. You both talk about your personal experiences, but recognizing the need to combine the wealth of knowledge from both sides and from everyone. It's a collective action that we all have to take, right? So how do we, when we're moving forward, how do we create the knowledge of networks, with advances in technology, in science, with the kind of oral history and knowledge of your grandparents and your ancestors before them, to create a vehicle for real change? What's kind of that key to, I guess, moving forward?
I think that at the end of the day, policymakers wield the most power within these conversations. The connections between those in power and the people that will make the most difference and also have the most negative impact, receive the most negative impact from climate change, they don't really have that much of a connection. There's a big divide between those groups of people. And so what we need to focus on is the distribution of power and the lines of communication. The wealth of indigenous knowledge and the wealth of knowledge within the African American community is there. It's not a question of whether or not they're willing to give it. It's a question of whether or not policymakers are willing to accept that they don't have all of the answers, that they need to go elsewhere to look for the answers and the knowledge to solve these problems. And it's really about policymaking and choosing to revamp that system.
I wouldn't add too much on that. When we reconnect back to the land and our relationship with it, we better understand our individual destiny and how we leave our mark on this world. And I think that can fit within a large spectrum of possibilities underneath the specific description that Alexa gave.
Thanks both for such a thorough answer on that question. I'm going to ask one. I'm going to continue on with the questions that we have, just for time's sake. You both have experience bringing your activism to large international conferences. For those of us who haven't been to these intergovernmental gatherings like that, what can you paint a picture for us on what those are like and what it means for you to be an expert speaking and bringing your voices to these meetings?
Yeah, I can go. Definitely. The first time that I ever had an experience doing that was at COP21 in Paris. I went with the same organization I mentioned, the HBCU Climate Change Consortium, led by Beverly Wright. And it was an exciting time. I can admit that I was the only one of few very African American women that were there. Um, these conferences are held on humongous campuses with many negotiators and different public leaders and lots of side events that are happening throughout the city. COP21 was in Paris, and it was very hard for them to come to a consensus on the Paris Climate Agreement. And it was an important document. But that excitement and that kind of good energy is not one that's held throughout the conferences. When I went to COP24 in Poland, they have to come to a consensus in order to decide on these big issues that will affect everyone throughout the world. And so I guess my main message is these conferences are important because they bring attention to these issues and they involve a lot of people that can be influential to the outcomes of these problems. But it's merely a framework. This is one piece of a puzzle, and the kind of change that's required is more than the Paris Climate Agreement. It's more than the Conference of Parties. It's more than those kinds of gatherings. And to bring my expertise and my voice to those gatherings, I would say definitely adds perspective, but the individual acts that people make outside of those conferences and as a result of them are most important.
Hi, thank you for that, Alexa. And I apologize in advance if you hear my cat. We have had some moose coming through the backyard in the past few days, and she likes to talk with them quite loudly. While Alexa was speaking, I just thought of one specific memory. The one time I've been to the Conference of Parties, it was during a evening event where it was, it was a walk for the climate, and Indigenous constituency stayed together. And it was so beautiful to see the environment of Indigenous people from all over the world. We created this line where on one arm I had an elder from the Kingdom of Tonga, and on my left arm it was an elder from Guatemala representing Mayan people. Women from the north were singing with their drums, and women from South American tribes were dancing with their hair. They pulled out their hair ties and they danced with their hair moving in circles, and it was beautiful because it was a visual representation of the interconnection of Indigenous thoughts, passion, and love. And while we did it in that space, as Alexa said, there's not just one answer. The answer does not lie in the Conference of Parties, but it lies in the full spectrum of where we can do work on the ground, national and international. There's a lot of hope and beauty there, and standing together makes us so much more strong.
Thank you both. You are making my job as a moderator so easy because you're just feeding me these kind of lobs that I can for the next question. So for our last question, I'm going to actually provide you with a choice, so you can answer one of the questions that we got from our audience, or one that we already had on paper. And I think this goes to Alexa, something that you had mentioned in your last answer about individual actions. So the first question is, how can we help in making differences for the environment in our own communities? And the second question will be, what are one or two takeaways from our conversation that we've had today that you want to leave with our viewers? And if Maka, you want to go first, and then Alexa, you can wrap us up.
Thank you. I'll take the takeaway question for 50 points. I suppose in the end we want to ask the question of who will tell your story, and what is the echo and mark you will leave on the world. I hope that I can be remembered as being someone that was passionate and vulnerable, but also, an extension of Indigenous thought and her grandparents and great grandparents and her mother and her brother. And so I would say there's a lot of right ways to help the world within these. Find the one that gives you manamobira or like heart fire and focus on it and do the best you can at what resonates most in your heart and in your perspective, expertise, and experience. And I think you would leave a good echo if it's rooted and led by
that. I think that my answer to the question is similar to my answer to the paper question. My takeaway and the thing that you can do in your community is just to recognize that the people who help get your food to the table are oppressed and ignored worldwide. Valuable knowledge is being squandered as we speak, and there must be a major shift in how food systems operate in order for us to have a future. And so this can begin with you. Understanding more of how you get your food, who is helping you to get your food, who grows your food, where it is coming from. Those are the beginnings of change, and those are the beginnings of an awakening that we all could benefit from. Food is a climate and environmental issue that we encounter every single day. And shifting away from the industrial food production system is critical if we are ever to have any sort of major achievement in conservation and or climate resilience. So it all begins at the table. It all begins with your dinner after this live stream. Yeah.
I can't wait for us to be able to be together again and like just have a really great meal together. I feel like it would be such a great opportunity just to share that moment with you both. And with that, I just want to say thank you to you both, Alexa and Maka, for the discussion today. It's always great to be able to chat with you all. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in and for providing some really thoughtful questions. And throughout the year, we're going to be sharing more about Alexa and her work. And so this won't be the last time you see her. So we'll hear from her again soon. And thank you again for joining us, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great evening.